We are all a little depraved and debaucherous. Here is the king of podcasts.
And welcome, it's KOP, another Depraved and Debaucherous episode. We're going to talk about Colombia. So, we've talked numerous times about the passport bros, and one of the locations they have frequently traveled to is Colombia. And one of the areas that's very popular amongst these passport bros is the city of Medellin. So in the same way that people might have gone there and remember that, it's a very dangerous city, you would say, because of the fact that this is the home of where Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel comes into play. Like there's still, mob activity there decades later. And for whatever reason, there have been some things that have been going on within that country that have been a little bit startling. Now, I did make mention of here on the program a while back about there had been several tourists that were killed in Colombia. And I'm going to take this from the Associated Press from about 6 weeks ago, They said that there has been a brutal war involving the Colombian government, drug cartels, and other armed groups. A sharp dip in violence in the country's second biggest city attracted a lot of tourists with vivid colors, busy cafes, and moving nightlife. 1.4 million people visited last year, many of them American. But this tourism boom presented officials with a new set of dark challenges, an uptick in sex trafficking, and the killing of tourists and Colombian women after rendezvous on dating apps. So the mayor, who goes by Federico Gutiérrez, went to a park which is known for the sex trade. He says that the area has been out of control. And that sex and drug tourism has been a problem in Medellin, but the many dangers came to a head late last year when November and December, 8 American men were killed, many after meeting local women who were often used as pawns by criminal groups that target foreigners. And the killings prompted the U.S. Embassy in Bogota to warn in January that tourists had been slipped drugs and were later robbed or killed. American officials cautioned men against using dating apps and offered a way to seek out sex workers whose business is not criminalized in Colombia. Now, the lead prosecutor in Medellin had said that the recent killings followed similar scripts. A tourist contacts a local woman through social media or a dating app. When they meet, the man is handed a drink spiked with a substance such as scopolamine, which can cause people to fall unconscious and block their memories. The victims lose their belongings and, in some cases, their lives. One of the deaths they were talking about is Tugur Zhang, an activist and comedian from Minnesota, who went on a date with a Medellin woman, police say. And after meeting the women, Zhang was kidnapped on December 10th, tortured, beaten, and robbed. And despite his family paying a ransom for his release, he was taken to a nearby wooded area, thrown down a 250-foot cliff, and found dead the next day. Now, Colombian authorities have not suggested he was involved in prostitution, but Zhang went out several times with this woman who has been charged in the case, along with 2 men. And friends and relatives described Zhang as a gregarious man who lived to travel, especially to Colombia, where he had friends. There was also another death, which they had 5 tourists one of them was a Dutch visitor found dead at a hotel, 3 Americans in Lithuania who may have died by suicide. And there was also some foreigners caught up in this. A 20-year-old Colombian, Laura Lopera, was found jammed inside a suitcase. Authorities said her middle-aged Canadian ex-boyfriend, who met her on a dating app, was likely behind the death. What? Some weird shit going on. So the boyfriend fled the country. Is now being pursued by Interpol. And the Canadian Embassy in Bogota also said it was tracking the case, but could not share more information due to privacy concerns. So, the rise in tourism has coincided with an uptick in sexual exploitation and trafficking in a place where rates of violence against women are already sky high. There were, in 2023, a documented 1,259 cases of possible sexual exploitation of minors, nearly 60% increase from the year before. Much of the city's sex work is also fueled by poverty and a migration crisis from neighboring Venezuela. Vulnerable women often sell sex to make ends meet. The case for one young woman sex worker who fled economic crisis in Venezuela 5 years ago. Every weekend, she walks dressed up through Lleras Park, which is surrounded by clubs frequented by foreign tourists. The park is a small hub for Medellin's sex industry. And she made a point in saying that an American will pay $100 or even $200 for sex, but a Colombian never pays that much. So, according to this prostitute they talked to under condition of anonymity, she lives with her 8-year-old daughter and her mother and had to pay $50 to pay for a room where she lives. Some think that we're going to harm them, but none of us are all criminals. On a recent night, dozens of police officers and local government officials patrolled the park, accompanied by Mayor Gutierrez, and asked for identification ID from women entering the park through police checkpoints. Most were let through, but a couple of teenagers were stopped and taken to a van. When the police left, the area once again filled with sex workers of various ages. So Medellin's always going to be caught up in this. But the mayor, in those 6 weeks, has decided to crack down. Now he's taken a bigger step. He's banning prostitution in neighborhoods popular with tourists. So he's going to ban it. Now, the ban will be enforced in Provenza and El Poblado, 2 neighborhoods teeming with trending bars and clubs frequented by thousands of tourists. The neighborhoods have been popular with sex workers who walk the streets and international clients, and Gutierrez said criminal networks are taking minors to these districts and forcing them into sex work. Quote, "We have to recover the control of this area. It is also very important for us to protect the community. Sex work is legal in Colombia if it involves consenting adults, but local governments can ban this activity temporarily from parts of cities if it is deemed a threat to public order." And this ban comes days after an American man was found in a hotel room with 2 local girls aged 12 and 13 in a case that was widely covered by local media. A 36-year-old man was held in custody for 12 hours and then released while officials investigated the case, and then he left Colombia and went to Florida. The mayor says it's sad to see how many people believe they can come to Medellin and do whatever they want. And while tourists meet sex workers directly in the city streets, others are meeting them through dating apps, and some of these encounters have turned violent. So what we're getting right now is that it's teaching a lesson for the passport bros out there. Do not go through the dating apps and connect with someone expecting that things are going to go okay once you go over. I understand that most guys probably think of the idea like, oh, maybe I'll meet somebody before I go and then make the trip. And then you're going to connect with somebody. So you'll have somebody that you'll know that you can spend time with over there. Listen, when you're going on a trip like that in general, you should always just find somebody that can be a guide that's just a guide and not expect some, pseudo girlfriend to go ahead and take care of you and accompany you around everywhere you're going to go. Plus, on top of that, if you want to go ahead and frolic around and be really depraved and debaucherous, I know that some guys will go on these trips. They're not going to be there with just one woman. They're going to be there with multiple women and just enjoy themselves because they're there to spend and frolic and be with lots of women because that's what the plan says. That's how it plans out. And that's the part I think the guys don't understand, that Colombia now has gotten to this point, and this is not because so much of the sex work. I mean, the sex work has always been what it is, okay? But one of the things that's happening now is that it's obviously still a trade that women can be used and pushed into sex work involuntarily, and especially if they're minors. And that's not good. It's not good at all. I understand why the mayor's coming with that. But if he thinks he's going to go and curb this thing, who else takes over this? Because that's the part it comes down to. There's always going to be room for this kind of sex tourism. Like, that's always been a common thing, right? People that are guys, maybe mostly guys that are usually mongers. Like, they go ahead and they find a place to go and chill. And there are a number of places that guys will go because of the fact that, when things are so tough to go and date American women, because of all the, honestly, because of what social media has caused them to think they can have. And the ideas have been put in their head. Like, as an indoctrination of women becoming much more modernistic, feministic, in a way that social media has created this kind of thought process that women can be a certain way. But at the end of the day, women that get caught up in this are getting hurt from this. Okay, listen, it's one thing they're going to be caught up where a young, poor girl in Colombia is being caught up in the sex trade, whether it's voluntarily or not. There's another one of those where, those women are being exploited because the influx of Americans that are coming here to Medellin, 1.4 million, remember, tourists and most American, they're all going there to go ahead and get what they're not getting at home. See, I mean, I feel bad for the folks in Colombia, okay? Don't get me wrong. But one of the things that does be considered, okay, because of the oldest working profession out there, is that, again, one of the girls they talked to in the story, they mentioned the fact that, well, they're not all criminals. And some of those women that are out there, they might have kids, they might not have kids, they might try to make ends meet. Poverty is very much a real thing. And you know what? American dollars go a long way over there. So believe it or not, that some of the guys that are going down there and spending money on the tourism there, and if they allow to go ahead and do something that they can be able to do among consenting adults, which is legal in Colombia, then let them have it. Because it actually is kind of detrimental in helping the economy there. Like they're not just here just screwing around girls. They're also enjoying the lifestyle, enjoying, restaurants and clubs and going out and enjoying the city. It's not just that. So there's something to be said about that. And, shutting that down in Colombia because of the fact that this other ancillary activity is going on where criminals are using the advantage of guys coming into the country and using the dating apps and getting lured into the honey traps. Well, that's a big problem. And that's where guys need to be, aware. Passport boys, be aware of trying to meet anybody, in that way. What you want to have is somebody that that already is down there, or just be smart about it. Have the street smarts to know what you're doing when you're down there. Know your Spanish, or somebody that knows Spanish and understands things. Like, be aware. And you got to protect yourself, because that is third world country. It's a different kind of feel to it. Just like going to the Dominican Republic, it's the same way. You just need to be on your guard. Enjoy yourself, but hey, you're in a different place, and you can be made vulnerable. Criminals can be much more rampant especially in other Latin American countries, not just the Dominican Republic, but you can also think of Panama. You can think of Costa Rica. Those areas can also be subject to it. So you got to keep that in mind. And that's the part that's really amazing that I see this here, and I'm like, okay, I understand why this has to be made. This has to be done, but the ban is going to ultimately hurt tourism. For the criminals, they're going to find a way to continue to do criminal activity. So it's a matter of why put a ban when it doesn't do anything but just put a damper on tourism. Because once people around the world see that, guys, some people's plans to go to Colombia, they might get shut down, or for those that are going to be out there, you're going to have to find a different way. Now, you can go into the clubs. You can go into various hotels that actually cater to this kind of thing as well. I know that for a fact. There are hotels that, the women they can be met in the hotel or staying in the hotel in most cases. And it's like big brothel. You can go in there and, have your fun. Like those kind of places exist in Colombia, in not too far from Medellin. So you could have that as well. But for guys, if you're going to go and have the guts, don't go to the dating apps. What you should do is, if you're going to go to these other countries, go meet like you would anyone else. Because remember, you don't have to go and be apprehensive or insecure or feel like you can't talk. Because remember, the women are going to be so much different when they go over there. They're going to approach you. They're going to come and talk to you. And then you can talk to them. And some of them might know very well English and more enough be fluent in English to be able to go ahead and, talk with you and get to know you. Because we've seen plenty of passport boys that have gone down there and they just go down there and just go and meet women and just have fun. Like, the thing is, you need to be able to know that you can go down to these clubs and listen, if you don't want to pay, you don't want to pay. If you want to just date, you can probably date. Because that's the other part that a lot of guys will go down there and do as well. They can go ahead and meet women and not feel like they have to go and be there for any kind of transactional kind of deal. That there are some guys that legitimately feel like they can go there and meet a good woman and just wine and dine and have the girlfriend experience and not make her wish just for sex, and just here we go. Quid pro quo. That's quid pro quo, right? It doesn't have to be like that. Because I'm sure there are plenty of girls that would love to get and find somebody that could sweep them off their feet and take them away from Medellin into America and give them the visa, give them the marriage passport, all that stuff, and be happy and, live their lives. Because we know the guys can go and do that. It's possible. But that's the part that people are realizing that, you shouldn't be going over there and think you're going to meet someone on the dating apps and right away that's going to make a change. Because it's not. So, Mayor Gutierrez wants to take rapid steps to reduce the vice and sex tourism that grew rapidly during the previous mayoral administration. So he uses emergency powers to outlaw prostitution effective immediately in Medellin's El Poblado sector, including the Parquelleras and Provenza neighborhoods popular with tourists. Mayor also restricts bars, restaurants, and nightclubs to a 1 a.m. closing time. And also a curfew measure was put on minors that's still in effect that the mayor enacted at the end of January, and several commercial districts of the city where nightlife is a major component. Quote, "We have to recover these spaces that crime has been taking over, deconfusing these areas of the city and putting our women, and especially our girls, boys, and adolescents at risk." So the work of our mayor's office will continue there every day, 24 hours a day, with all of our support. He explained that sex trafficking is controlled by the La Terraza, La Raya, and Robledo mafias that are active in Medellin. Here, we need everyone's commitment to understand this is a situation that has hit rock bottom. We didn't come here to hide problems. We came to recognize them. I said it from my first day in office. Some measures have been taken, and there are some other exceptional ones. The Colombian police sealed a luxury guest house called Gotham, which is located in the Poblado area in the Parque Lleras neighborhood. A closure lasted for 10 days pending additional legal sanctions. The mayor's call for asset forfeiture of this property. Now, Gotham is not a hotel, but a guest residence with 5 units marketed through Airbnb. And the company that owns this property says that we categorically repudiate any form of sexual exploitation of boys, girls, and teenagers. We do this not only as responsible tourism actors in the city of Medellin, but also in our condition as fathers, mothers, daughters, and sons. Going along. And they talked about the story of the 36-year-old man who their name is Timothy Allen Livingston. He was caught in a luxury guest house, this Gotham guest house, which was marketed through Airbnb with 2 girls aged 12 to 13. Here's what he explained happened in the case. So this was last week, March 27th of this year. Livingston tried to enter with 2 companions who were carrying identification as adults. The security guard prohibited their entry, suspecting that they could be minors. The building's security cameras show that Livingston would have returned to the building and entered illegally in the morning of March 28th, when the night security guard shift had already ended. But then a complaint of a neighbor, National Police was alerted to the situation, and since our entire team is actively collaborating with the ongoing investigation. Our country has deep social problems. Just between January and August 2023, there were over 8,295 sexual crimes against minors, according to data provided by the Attorney General's office. And so we're seeing the story about this, and guys like this, I don't know, this guy's a, child predator going after young women. Yeah, this guy should have been caught. And who knows where those women came from and how they were able to get some IDs that were fake, all about it. Now, that's the part about Colombia we got to think about. That's one thing. But there was another story that came in here as well. So if you can't go to Colombia to go get your jollies off, can't be the prey of the debaucherous in Medellin, well, guess where you're going to be able to do that soon? America. Another story that's coming in right now. By the way, the ban is a 6-month prohibition on prostitution in popular tourist areas. 6 months. Let's see how that lasts out there. So there's a story that came out from mercatornet, a compass for common sense. And this is obviously somebody that's advocating. And just to give us some information about the site, they talk about the dignity of the human person at the center of everything. So Mercator talks about the new trend of decriminalizing prostitution. Valerie Hudson wrote about this earlier this month. And they're looking at the legal approach that each nation takes with regard to prostitution. So she goes in and says that, in other words, there's a lot of complexity here. Some countries, buying sex is perfectly legal, but providing that sex for money is strictly illegal. Others countries do abrupt legal U-turns as they discover that the approach they're taking is making things worse. So in this story, they ask, is prostitution merely another form of work? Is it inevitable, ineradicable? Is this a my body, my choice situation? Or is prostitution one of the socially sanctioned gross human rights violations remaining? While the philosophical debate rages at a different level of analysis, outcomes for women who engage in prostitution, there's no controversy. It's estimated that females make up more than 80% of all prostitutes. Decades of research show that women in prostitution fare worse, far worse than pretty much every imaginable physical and mental health outcome measure. Homicide rate for prostitutes is 229 per 100,000, higher than the highest workplace homicide rates of any regular occupation, higher than taxi cab drivers, liquor store workers, and soldiers. About that. Now, they go into the story about, don't get me wrong, very important what they talk about, that there is a lot of injury, a lot of trauma, physical, emotional, mental trauma that does come from prostitution. Absolutely. Now, she writes here that psychological injury is also prevalent. High suicide and PTSD can be noticed. Studies show prostitutes suffer more than combat veterans from PTSD. Prostitution chews up and spits out women. It's a form of violence against women. It's a sex-based crime because 99% of sex buyers are male. So if we focus on the actual fate of women in prostitution, we have to come to the conclusion that the sex trade should be abolished. Just as in the U.S., it's illegal for individuals to sell their organs to the highest bidder or offer themselves for sale as slaves. The states have largely adopted the legal approach of prohibition of prostitution. That is, with certain exception of certain counties in Nevada, both the buying and selling of sex as well as ancillary activities such as pimping are all illegal in the U.S. But that's beginning to change. This is the part I wanted to tell you about. Go down a couple paragraphs. Both New York and California, as well as the rest of Nevada, are inching towards the decriminalization of prostitution. Decriminalization is not the same thing as legalization. Under the legalization models, prostitution supposedly comes above ground and prostitutes are taxed like any other worker and purportedly fall under workplace safety requirements. In practice, of course, prostitutes are in countries where it is legal report no legal increase in safety and trafficking actually increases. Governments are not simply capable or not interested in providing the type of oversight that would be necessary. So now there's this decriminalization model. That nothing about prostitution comes under the purview of law. Buying, selling, and pimping of all sex lie outside the law's interest. No one involved, prostitutes, johns, pimps, brothel owners, will be subject to arrest for involvement in the sex trade. Police and judges would not have to spend any time on such cases. The United Nations, the Council of Europe, and NGOs like Amnesty International have come out in favor of the decriminalization model. So if safety of women is your concern, then all that decriminalization can offer is that police will no longer arrest you for being a prostitute. However, all the forms of male violence against prostitutes not only remain untouched, but offer a tacit social sanction. Pimps are now managers, for example. The police are to take a hands-off approach. Indeed, even if a prostitute is killed, it's hard to imagine the police would be very interested in such deaths. Wow, that's quite a point. But now, this is being thought about. We've heard about this already before. There's also the idea of an abolitionist model applied to prostitution that would still seek to punish johns, pimps, and brothel owners, but prostitutes would not be arrested or jailed. Instead, they would be given meaningful support to leave prostitution. 7 nations and 2 subnational entities have adopted the abolition approach. Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Canada, Northern Ireland, France, Ireland, Israel, and the U.S. state of Maine. None that have adopted the approach have subsequently dropped it. Others have partially followed the model. Texas is the first state in the union to make the buying of sex an automatic felony. In Utah, it's a misdemeanor. So Anna Fisher is one of the leading figures advocating for the abolition model, and she discussed the positive consequences seen in nations that have adopted it. That research shows the number of people involved in prostitution in any capacity severely contracts under this model, and murder rates of prostitutes plummet compared to countries where prostitution is legalized or decriminalized. And she also notes that while it takes money to help women out of prostitution, the savings to the nation are immense when you factor the children who now do not need to be sent to foster care, or the costs associated with handling the increased drug trafficking and other crimes such as robbery and mugging that always attend areas of prostitution. In Germany, the mega brothel of Europe, since it illegalized prostitution in 2002, is now considering to move to an abolitionist model. So what do we think about that? The idea of that prostitution, if it's allowed, I mean, this is a shame that we're even getting to this point, because there might be states that might just feel like, well, I mean, part of it is like this. I bring this story up here because why is it that women are being drawn to prostitution? I mean, for the most part, most of these prostitutes, unless they have someone that's pimping them out, or they're with a significant other that's pushing them out there to go and do that. Because there's many cases in that. There are some cases of that too. Where they're being forced to be prostitutes. Okay? It's stopping it before it happens. Now, it's one of those things where, I've always said, if you want to legalize, that's fine. But what's the most important thing that has to happen is that if you legalize it or decriminalize it, what's to be said about the women that find themselves in that place, in that line of work in the first place? I mean, part of it is like, okay, well, the kind of work that women are looking for, even if they're college educated, and the degrees that they might go ahead and seek out, they don't matter because they can't find, tangible work that really fits their degree. So what are the jobs they're going to take? And if they're not learning a trade, what else can they do? The other part is the traditional model of marriage, which, 60 years ago would have been more the norm, where women were not so much inclined to be full-time workers looking for a career and looking to advance themselves up the ladder, in Wall Street, Silicon Valley, or whatever other part of corporate America. That was never the intent. Of course, there were quite a women that would do that anyway, but they still wanted to have a family. They still wanted to have a love. They wanted to have love in their life. But because of all the things that are going on, okay, the guys are caught up in the fact that, okay, well, if they can't find anybody they can be with, then yeah, if the possibility is to go ahead and hook up with somebody and it's, friends with benefits, or if it's something just to go ahead and go pay for play, they will. And if they go in since they can't find it anywhere here, they'll seek it out somewhere else. Why not? Because you have to think about, of the women that are in the trade, how many of them got caught up in drug use or alcohol abuse? And why did it happen to them? And how come they all get caught up in some reason, some way, shape, or form that they get caught up in being on the streets? Or now not much on the streets, but they're going up online and they're putting themselves on ads and they're trying to find guys to go and meet up with them. I mean, we're not even having interaction in real life anymore, where men and women just meet up. Even if it was just for a transaction, even if it was a guy trying to meet with a prostitute, if it was in person, not this online stuff where you really can't know who you're talking to. You meet somebody and you do what you're going to go do, whether it's legitimate or not. But the problem is that it lies much more deeply into where some of these women find themselves in this spot after everything's said and done. Because before all this, they were innocent. Before all this, they were not traumatized. They were not hurt. They were not bad. I mean, we don't know what happened to them to lead them into this. But I would imagine that most prostitutes, they find themselves in that situation because of trauma, because of various levels of trauma that happened to them before they got into the space in the first place. And it could be, the lack of parents, or being caught in foster care, or just having a bad break. But there's so many reasons where we need to go and protect the women before they ever get into that point. Because once you have a woman that goes into prostitution, once they're there, their lives change forever. And I know that's how it works. It's not the ultimate choice. It's a last resort. I mean, to make yourself just completely open and accessible for the right price, it's sad. But for some, they can find their way out of it, or they can find what they need to do, just like anybody else. Every other woman, if they're young, they're beautiful, they do something with their beauty, with what they need to do just to be able to get ahead. And they can find their way out of it. They're strong enough to get themselves out of what happened with what they went through, and they can move on with their lives and still live a life that's, fruitful and enjoyable and happy. I still think that can be possible. But, the decriminalization takes away the fact that they would not get charged for it. They would not get criminalized. So now, if that's the one case, okay, but let's take the part about the violence out. Let's take the part about the trauma and how the woman might be into this business because of what's going on, and make it safer. Or find a way to they can find a safe way out. I mean, for what this mayor in Colombia wants to do, I get what he wants to try to do, but the thing is that his answer for this is not going to be the ultimate answer. That place is always going to be ridden with prostitution, with sex work, with brothels, with all that going on. That's just the way it is. Because you never know if that mayor is going to stick around long enough, because you know what? The cartels over there could very well go and wipe that guy off. They could go and snuff him out. They did it all the time. Just watch the Cocaine Cowboys documentary. They'll show you. Trust me. So what about the American guys? The guys looking for passport bros. The guys going to be looking, we don't want, let's put it like this. I'm sure there are plenty of guys that don't want to be a part of prostitution. They don't want to have anything to do with that. I think most guys would prefer not to have that happen at all. If we could just go ahead and date like any other self-respecting guy, that's what we want. But let's put it like this as well. The women that are into sugar dating, the women that are very much materialistic, you're prostituting yourselves already. Like, don't deny it anymore, but you are. You're in the same, just because you might not show yourself as such, and you might not be out there street walking literally, but you know what? You give all the signs and all the signals that you're a prostitute yourself. Call a spade a spade. Call it what it is. I think we need to go make that much more clear for all those out there. For ladies, all of you out there, you do realize that the way you kind of ramp around and act, okay, when you're looking for what you want, it's the same as prostitution. Now, if you find somebody you're getting to spoil you and this and that, if you're in a relationship with them and you're taking care of them, then, it's not prostitution. It's a relationship. But you're pimping yourself out. You want all these things that you want because you want to live this life. You're prostituting yourself. I mean, nothing wrong with it. I'm not judging. I'm not blaming. That's on you. But just admit it to yourself. Don't be out there delusional. Don't be out there delusional thinking, that you're high and mighty, you're more sanctimonious than that. No, you're not. No, you're not. Just admit that you are a little more than you think you are, that you definitely let yourself out there. And, when you dress up slutty, you go out there looking like a harlot, then you know what? And there's things that you want out of the men you're with, then maybe you're probably prostituting yourself. And maybe you're a little more hypersexual, a little more dangerous, a little more deviant than you really think you are. Because maybe you are, ladies out there, just as depraved and debaucherous.